You spent 11 years grieving a man they told you was gone, buried under a folded flag and a letter from the Department of Defense that used words like, killed in action, and with deepest condolences, words too clean for a wound that never actually closed. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, the barista at your regular coffee shop tells you, almost in passing, that your order's already paid for, again, by the same man who's been doing it quietly for 6 months. And you finally turn around to see who's been watching you order the same drink every single day. You are Wilhelmina Ashcombe. Everyone but your late grandmother called you. Billie, 42 years old, living in a small 2-bedroom bungalow on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina. You run a modest bookkeeping business out of your spare room, work that lets you set your own hours, and pick your daughter up from school every day at 3:15, a schedule you built with the same stubborn precision you've built everything else in your life since the year your world came apart. Your daughter Marlo is 10 now, quick-witted and endlessly curious, and she asks you questions about her father that you've learned to answer honestly, because you decided a long time ago that grief deserves truth even when truth is unbearably sad. 11 years ago, you were married to Cassius Fenwick, a staff sergeant deployed on his 3rd tour overseas, a man with a low laugh and a habit of humming under his breath when he was concentrating, who used to leave you handwritten notes in your coffee tin before every deployment, because he knew mornings were hardest for you when he was gone. On a gray March afternoon, 2 officers in dress uniforms knocked on your door, and by the time they finished the sentence, you already knew how it ended. Because you'd watched enough. Military wives learn to read a knock before it fully finished happening. Killed in action. A vehicle struck by an improvised device on a supply route outside a forward base. No body recovered intact enough for an open casket. You buried an empty flag-draped coffin in a military cemetery outside Asheville. And you raised Marlo, who was born 7 months after the funeral. A fact that still catches in your throat when you say it out loud, believing entirely, for 11 years, that her father died before he ever got to hold her. You built a life out of that grief, the way people do when there's no other option available. You went back to school for accounting because numbers, unlike people, don't leave without explanation. You became close with the other military widows in your support group at the VA center, women who understood the specific loneliness of loving someone the government has officially declared gone. You raised Marlo with photographs and stories instead of a father. Told her about Cassius's crooked smile and his habit of humming and the coffee tin notes. Kept every one of those notes in a shoebox on your closet shelf because throwing them away felt like a second funeral you weren't ready to hold. Every morning, without fail, you stop at the same small coffee shop on Haywood Street, Marchetti's, a narrow brick storefront wedged between a bookstore and a tailor's shop, and order the same drink. A large oat milk latte, 2 shots, no sugar. A habit so consistent, the barista started calling it the usual within your first month as a regular. It's a small ritual, but rituals, you've learned in the 11 years since Cassius died, are what hold a life together when the people who were supposed to hold it left instead. About 6 months ago, the young barista, a college student named Audilus with a nose ring and an easy smile, told you your order was already covered. Regular's been paying it forward for you, she said, shrugging like it was nothing. You assumed it was a one-time kindness, maybe a mistaken generosity meant for someone else. But it happened again the next morning, and the morning after that. Week after week, month after month. Someone paid for your coffee before you arrived. Always gone by the time you walked in, always anonymous. The barista either not knowing or not telling who it was. At first it unsettles you more than it touches you. The particular vulnerability of being watched by someone who chooses not to reveal themselves. The small, anxious voice in your head that wonders whether this is kindness or something else entirely. You ask Odalis more than once who's doing it. She always gives the same careful non-answer. He asked me not to say. Says you'll know when you're ready. The phrase needles at you every time, because you don't know what it's supposed to mean. And something about when you're ready implies a version of you that's supposed to arrive at readiness for something you don't understand yet. Marlo, when you tell her about it over dinner one night, lights up in the uncomplicated way only a 10-year-old can. Maybe it's an angel, she says, entirely serious, like Dad, watching over us. You smile at her the way you've learned to smile at her. Theories about her father, gently, without correcting the impossible parts. Because faith, even a child's, deserves a little room to breathe. But the mystery gnaws at you in the quiet hours. The way things do when you live alone with a school-aged daughter and two. Much time after 9 p.m. to think. You start watching the shop more carefully, arriving a few minutes earlier some days, lingering a few minutes longer on others, trying to catch the shape of the person who's been quietly funding your smallest daily comfort for half a year without ever once asking for a name or a thank you. One rain-soaked Tuesday in late October. You arrive at Marchetti's earlier than usual because Marlo has an early dentist appointment and your schedule's been shifted all week. The shop is nearly empty, just Autolus behind the counter and, in the corner booth by the window, a tall man in a faded canvas jacket, gray-flecked beard, a baseball cap pulled low, nursing a black coffee and reading a paperback with the particular stillness of someone who comes here often, but has never once let you notice him. Odalis rings up your usual order and, out of habit, reaches for the register and stops herself, glancing toward the corner booth with an expression you've learned, after 6 months, to recognize. "It's covered," she says quietly. You turn, this time, before you can stop yourself, and the man in the corner booth looks up from his paperback, and for one suspended silent second, the baseball cap and the beard, and 11 years of grief, all fall away from his face at once, and you are looking at a version of Cassius Fenwick you buried, empty casketed, 11 years ago in a military cemetery on the edge of this same town. Your coffee cup slips from your hand and shatters on the tile floor, and neither of you moves to clean it up, because the entire shop has narrowed down to the 6 feet of space between his booth and where you're standing frozen, staring at a dead man drinking black coffee in a bookshop cafe on a rainy Tuesday. "Billie," he says, and his voice, older, rougher, carrying 11 years of something you can't yet name, is unmistakably his. The same voice that used to hum under its breath while concentrating. The same voice that left notes in your coffee tin before every deployment. "You're dead," you say, and it comes out flat, disbelieving, the words of someone whose grief has just been declared a clerical error. "They told me you were dead. I buried you. I raised our daughter believing—" "I know," he says, and he's standing now, hands raised slightly. The posture of a man approaching something fragile. He's terrified of breaking further. "I know what they told you, Billie. I need you to let me explain. And I know there's no version of this explanation that doesn't sound like the worst thing a person could do to the people who loved him. You want to scream at him. You want to walk out of the shop and never look back. But 11 years of unanswered grief have left a hole in you shaped exactly like this conversation. And some desperate part of you needs to hear what fills it, even if what fills it breaks you further. "The vehicle was hit," he says, voice shaking now. "Exactly the way they told you. 3 of my men died in it. I was thrown clear, unconscious, unidentifiable for weeks, burns, a head injury that wiped out chunks of memory, moved through 2 field hospitals before anyone even had a name to put with my face. By the time my memory started coming back in pieces, you, Billie, this town, a name, I couldn't fully place. The Army had already processed me as killed in action. The paperwork, the funeral, all of it had already happened. And when I finally had enough of myself back to understand what had happened, I sat in a VA hospital bed for 8 months staring at a wall, trying to figure out how a man walks back into a life that's already buried him. "So you didn't," you say, voice breaking, "for 11 years. You didn't." "I was ashamed," he says. And it's the same confession you've heard from other broken men in other stories, except this time it's the man you married saying it, the man whose child you raised on stories instead of a father. "I told myself too much time had passed, that you'd built a life without me, that showing up would only tear it back open. I told myself staying gone was a mercy. I moved here 8 months ago because I found out, through an old Army buddy, that you'd settled in Asheville. And I told myself I'd just watch from a distance, make sure you and the baby I never even knew about were okay, and leave it at that." "Her name is Marlo," you say, and something in his face collapses entirely at the name, a grief and a joy arriving in the same instant. "She's 10. She thinks her dead father might be an angel watching over her, because someone's been paying for my coffee for 6 months, and I never once considered that the angel might just be a coward too afraid to knock on his own door." "I know," he says, tears finally breaking through the composure he's been fighting to hold. "I know exactly how that sounds, Billie. I've paid for that coffee every single morning for 6 months because it was The only way I could think of to be close to you without breaking everything you'd rebuilt. I told myself I'd tell you when I was ready. I just never let myself believe there'd be a version of ready that didn't feel like destroying you all over again. You don't get to decide that for me, you say. And you're crying now, too. 11 years of unanswered questions finally finding a target to land on. You don't get to grieve me from a corner booth for 6 months and call it mercy. Mercy doesn't leave a 10-year-old girl thinking her father's a ghost. I know, he says again, and it's the only thing he seems to have left to say. The words worn thin from months of rehearsing this confession that never once felt safe enough to deliver. You stand in the middle of that shattered coffee cup for a long moment. 11 years of grief and 6 months of unknowing tenderness colliding into something you don't yet have a word for. You don't forgive him. Not in that instant. Forgiveness, you're learning in real time, isn't a door that swings open all at once. It's a long hallway, and you've only just found yourself standing at its entrance, staring down its length. Marlo doesn't know anything yet, you say finally, quietly, wiping your face with the back of your hand. If you want to be part of her life, even a little, you don't get to ask me to build that bridge for you. You show up. You tell her the truth, all of it, in language a 10-year-old can survive hearing. And you let her decide, in her own time, what happens after that. Will you let me try? He asks, and his voice is so small, so unlike the guarded stranger in the corner booth who spent 6 months paying for your coffee, rather than saying a single word. That's something in you. Not forgiveness, but recognition, maybe, of the frightened man underneath the coward, cracks open despite yourself. I'll bring her here, you say. Saturday morning, you tell her yourself. What she does with it after that is hers to decide. Not yours, not mine. That Saturday, you sit 2 tables away while Cassius, no longer the anonymous stranger in the corner booth, the name finally spoken aloud again after 11 years, kneels down to meet your daughter at eye level and tells her, gently, in pieces small enough for a 10-year-old heart to hold, the truth about the 11 years he spent presumed dead and the 8 months of shame that kept him silent even after he knew better. You watch Marlo's face move through confusion, disbelief, something that isn't quite anger and isn't quite joy, and finally, slowly, something that looks almost exactly like the wonder she brought to her angel, theory months earlier, except now it has a real face attached to it. You paid for Mom's coffee, she says finally, working through it out loud the way children do, because you were too scared to just say hi. Yes, Cassius says, and there's no dressing it up, no softening it further. That's exactly it. I was a coward hiding behind a coffee cup, Marlo. I should have just said hi. That's a really bad plan, Marlo says, with the blunt honesty only a 10-year-old can deliver, and despite everything, despite 11 years of grief and 8 months of silence and 6 months of anonymous coffee, you feel something in your chest loosen slightly at the sound of your daughter laughing, actually laughing, at the man she'd spent a decade believing was an angel. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, you find yourself back at Marchetti's, and Odalis hands you your usual order without ringing you up. An old habit that never quite went away even after the anonymity ended. Cassius sits across from you and Marlo now, openly, his baseball cap gone, his face no longer hidden in a corner booth. He started the slow work of rebuilding, a small apartment 2 blocks away, supervised visits that are becoming week by week, something closer to ordinary time together, a hallway of forgiveness that you're both still walking down, neither of you rushing toward its end. You still keep the shoebox of coffee tin notes on your closet shelf. You've added one more to it recently, a note.
Cassius left folded under your usual mug one morning.
In handwriting 11 years older but unmistakably his, that simply says, I'm sorry it took me this long to say hi. You don't know some mornings whether you'll ever fully close the distance those 11 years carved into you. But you know this, your daughter, who once believed her father was a ghost watching over her from somewhere unreachable, now has a father who shows up in person every single Saturday, and some quiet healing part of you has started to believe that the people who feel most impossibly lost are sometimes only one shattered coffee cup away from finding their way back to who they used to be. If you'd let someone back into your life after a truth this hard to hear, tell me in the comments below. And if this story reached you, subscribe for next week, when we tell the story of a CEO who ate lunch alone in the break room every single day, and the one employee brave enough to finally ask him why.